Electric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast, celebrating the tracks by a musical pioneer.
I'm sure that every Gary Numan fan has their own personal favourite album that might not always rank highly among the wider fan base. While the Pleasure Principle will always be my absolute favourite, I've always had a love for a certain mid-80s album that often goes overlooked, and it's a perfect example of the importance of an album's image, and if it doesn't quite hit the mark, it could ruin its reputation forevermore. And so for this episode of Electric Friends, I'll be looking at 1985's The Fury album, and in particular, its lead single, Your Fascination.
My confession, I'll steal anything inside the sound. My confession, this is the sound of fear and I'll fall down. No more pictures.
The Fury feels like it came out a lot later than 1985. It's easy to think that this was among Numan's self-described low period of the late 80s and early 90s, but it was actually his seventh solo album and the follow-up to 1984's Berserker. Released in September 1985, it was Gary's second LP of his self-owned Numa Records label, and it saw him continuing to explore sample-heavy industrial sound that he had developed for Berserker. While his previous album had failed to make a big commercial impact, Gary decided to continue with a similar sound for The Fury. For the second time in his career, he decided to team up with others to produce the album, this time recruiting the Wave team consisting of Mike Smith and Ian Heron as his co-producers. Colin Thurston also assisted on the production of one track, the track being Your Fascination. The Fury had various samples as well as the metallic industrial sound heard on Berserker, but this time with layers of electro-funk that he had previously experimented with on I Assassin and Warriors. The album is dominated by aggressive electronic percussion and samples, but the fretless bass that had been abundant on previous albums had largely been dropped, with only 3 tracks featuring real bass. There was also the usage of the PPG Wave synthesizer. So for those who may not know, as I didn't, the PPG Wave was a series of synthesizers produced by the German company Palm Products GmbH from 1981 to 1987. And before the early 1980s, commercial synthesizers were limited to sounds created by combining a few simple waveforms like sine, sawtooth and pulse, which were then shaped using VCFs and VCAs. And then Wolfgang Palm broke this barrier by introducing wavetable synthesis, a concept where single-cycle waveforms with different harmonic spectra were stored in adjacent memory slots. Dynamic spectral shifts were achieved by scanning through these waveforms, with interpolation used to avoid noticeable jumps between them. This innovation led to PPG's first wavetable synth, the Wave Computer 360 in 1978, offering users 30 different wavetables, 64 waves each. And despite its wide range of sounds, the lack of filters made the Wave Computer 360 sound buzzy and thin, affecting its commercial success. So Palm addressed these issues with the development of the PPG Wave series of synths. Notable artists which used the Wave include obviously Gary, but as well as that, Aha, Alphaville, Bronski Beat, David Bowie, Go West, Hall & Oates, Trevor Horn, Marillion, Journey, Level 42, Art of Noise, Rush, Depeche Mode, Robert Palmer, Tangerine Dream, The Stranglers, Talk, Tears for Fears, Steve Winwood, Stevie Nicks, Styx, Thomas Dolby, Ultravox, Wang Chung, and even Stevie Wonder. PPG's advancements in digital synth technology significantly influenced the industry, and the PPG Wave synthesizer initially sold for $7,000 to $10,000. Within a few years though, more affordable digital synthesizers like the Yamaha DX7, the Korg DW8000, and the sequential Prophet VS entered the market. Additionally, advancements in digital sampling technology and decreasing memory costs led to the introduction of user-friendly samplers, such as the MU Emulator 2, the Ensoniq Mirage, and the sequential Prophet 2000. PPG's declining market share and the high cost of new product development caused financial struggles and ultimately led to the company ceasing operations in 1987. There was also saxophonist Dick Morrissey, who had appeared on Warriors. He was back to provide the more melodic elements of the album, and then you also had Tessa Niles and Tracy Ackerman performing female backing vocals, similar to those heard on Berserker. And sampling is a large part of the album, particularly on the album's opening track and second single, Call Out the Dogs, which uses several recognisable samples taken from the film Blade Runner, and we'll definitely go into that on a future episode. Gary supported The Fury with a 17-date live UK tour in September and October 1985, however no live albums or videos were released officially from the tour. And writing in his book Praying to the Aliens, Gary has said of the album, "The Fury possesses a very metallic, industrial feel. It's rhythmic and funky, using a wide range of staccato sounds built up through our experimental time with the PPG. In fact, it was the first time I'd written a complete album in the studio. Until then, I had sat at home working out the melodies on the piano. On The Fury, we went into the studio and worked on the grooves first, which were all electronic. There were no real drums, very little conventional bass playing, and virtually no guitar on the album. It was more spontaneous in many ways than how I'd worked before." And then in his recent book, Revolution, he added,
On this album, Mike Smith and Ian Heron joined me once again, and they'd also be co-producers. I had intended working with a producer called Colin Thurston, but after contributing to just one track, he was called away to work on the new Human League album.
So Colin Thurston had previously co-engineered David Bowie's Heroes and Iggy Pop's Lust for Life, and later produced big albums for the Human League, Duran Duran and Talk Talk, among others. And it was Your Fascination that he produced before leaving the project. He sadly died in 2007, aged just 59, after a long illness. He added in Praying to the Aliens that it wasn't cheap to make the album either. He said, "Fury was also my most expensive album to make. I was in Rock City for about 90 days, usually with the Wave team. Still only cost £12,000, which I mostly spent on hiring Dick Morrissey, Tessa Niles and the producers. Their contributions complemented each other brilliantly, but I still spent many hours alone working on my own ideas, which is why I think I must be one of the cheapest studio acts in the business. I know bands who spend 10 times that on demos. In fact, one of Numa's acts, Hokum, spent £60,000 on an album that never came out. That's a ridiculous amount, as they had free studio time at Rock City." The original album cover artwork and the overall style of the era was quite the opposite to what was going on in the music, featuring a Brian Ferry-esque Gary dressed in a white suit and a red bow tie, posing in a tilted photograph against a white background, with the album name written on with a 1950s style font. Numan later admitted that the cover was completely inappropriate, probably did the album a great disservice, and made him look more like the man who lost it all at Monte Carlo. It was a strange image, perhaps influenced by other artists at the time, but it did little to represent what the album was actually like, and perhaps put some people off. And so to Your Fascination, and while it's very much a pop song, it has a somewhat gritty and industrial edge to it. The hard synth sounds and drum beat make it a Prince-style funky track, and Gary's vocals have an irritated edge to it to go alongside the lyrics, while Tessa Niles joins him throughout. I know it's not easy to be a fan of the female backing era, but I really love Tessa's vocals on this, and if anything, it's one of his most beautiful pop choruses ever.
Your fascination leaves me cold. Your fascination leaves me cold.
And so in the song, Gary seems to be in some kind of tryst with someone who has a fascination towards him, but their love seems to be cold and unfulfilling. The chorus, "Your fascination leaves me cold," perhaps suggests that despite the fascination the other person has towards him, he doesn't feel love or warmth from them. He also mentions that he doesn't need this kind of relationship and wants the other person to leave, but seems to be holding on for now.
I don't need it. If you're gonna leave, then do it soon. I don't need it. Everything you've ever seen, I've seen before. Leave her to me for now, now, now. Leave her to me for
The outro, Every Little Girl is Welcome Here, could be seen as an ironic statement, as it may suggest that the singer is willing to accept anyone who comes to him, but also implies a certain darkness and danger in his personality.
If you want it, every little girl is welcome here. If you want it, every little girl is welcome here.
But overall, Your Fascination describes the complicated emotions and fear of perhaps an unrequited love in a relationship, but who knows? In Praying to the Aliens, Gary explained his songwriting process for the album. He said, "On The Fury, I often started off with just a title for a song, such as Tricks, Your Fascination, and Creatures. I then tried to find lyrics that suited. A lot of the time I ended up writing about myself, pop stardom, crisis points, failure, sex, and the seedy side of life. These were recurring themes for years, and now I think of it, I became totally preoccupied with the career struggle, and it coloured my writing for far too long. I had recurring themes when I was at school too. I was often being told off in English for writing yet another war story as part of my essay homework. On one occasion, our English teacher said the essay title is Flower in the Morning Sun, and I wrote a long story about a man at war who died horribly. As he fell, mortally wounded, into the bottom of a muddy trench, he opened his eyes, and the last thing he sees was a flower in the morning sun. I really got in trouble for that." The single had its own video, and it featured Gary in his full Fury outfit alongside his then girlfriend Tracy Adam, lip-syncing to Tessa Niles' vocals. While relatively low budget, it's a pretty good video, featuring Gary and Tracy larking about during the instrumental breakdown. Your Fascination was released on August 10th, 1985, just over a month before the album. Sadly, it only reached number 46 in the charts, despite some cool picture discs on offer, which was quite a definite disappointment for Gary at the time. It did receive little airplay by radio, which was a huge shame, and as I've explained in previous episodes, by this point, Gary was deemed unfairly as old hat or naff at this point, and they didn't even give him a go, though it would have fit into radio playlists of the time perfectly fine and deserved more love. He wrote,
With each new album, my optimism for what might happen seemed to be renewed. Musically, they continued to evolve. Each one had a distinctly different sound to the one before, and I think that helped fuel my optimism. I wasn't churning out more of the same. Each album was a step forward, and with that came the chance that they would be viewed afresh, by radio especially. The first single from The Fury was called Your Fascination, and despite a decent video, received no airplay at all. Peaking at 46, it didn't even make the top 40. The next single, Call Out the Dogs, only reached number 49. The third single, Miracles, did about the same. None of them got any radio play, and my fears of being forgotten were borne out. Even worse, I wasn't even getting into the top 40 now, and so any slight pressure that some stations might have felt to play the records had vanished. Things were worse than ever. The album did a little better than the singles, reaching number 24, but things were definitely not going in the right direction, and my fall from glory seemed to be nigh on unstoppable. It was all very disappointing, to say the least.
Your Fascination was performed on and off for the next few years, but sadly hasn't been played live since 1993 from what I can see. And according to the singles credits, you had Gary on vocals and keyboards, Ted Sharpley on the timbal, Russell Bell on guitar, Andy Coughlin on fretless bass, the Wave Team on the PG arrangement, and Tessa Niles on backing vocals. It was produced by Colin Thurston and Gary, engineered by Peter Bullman, assisted by Andy Riley, and recorded and mixed at Rock City Studios in Shepperton. So for me, Your Fascination is a personal favourite of mine and a definite standout from his post-Telecon and pre-Sacrifice era. Me and my best mate Sam used to play it loads when we were at uni in the mid-noughties. It was a song that I'd only really recently discovered around that time, and became a personal favourite of ours, even at some point sneaking it into playlists at uni when we used to DJ, so I'm not sure how we got away with that one. So looking at your comments, I was shown this on the Numanoids Facebook group, and from David Bailey, who said, with a great picture of him at the time, way back in 1985, myself, Stephen Beer and Vincent Mitchell were on a wee trip to the Big Smoke to a Numan disco. The Flag, Dymaxion were the band in amongst Numan tunes, and well, what do you know, Mr. Numan turned up and mimed along to Your Fascination. We didn't have tickets for this event and it was sold out. Mr. Peter Gilbert let us in because we travelled from Glasgow and done ourselves up in the Berserker makeup stuff. We will always be in debt to the late Pete and Frank for this. It was a great night, and I wish I had more of the blue stuff on my hair to cover my 80s mullet. Peter Steer said on Facebook, the album came out on my 18th birthday. I thought they would hand deliver a signed copy, but alas not. Ian Fry put together a great message, including his thoughts on what the song is about. He said, "It's hard from this distance in time to fathom what was going wrong with Gary's career at this time. Your Fascination sounds amazingly bright, hooky and danceable, and Gary looks great in the video. Sadly, as we know, most people never got to hear it, as Radio 1 decided at this point Gary wasn't for them, the song deserved better. Whatever the rights and wrongs of this, the song's content is, well, fascinating. Behind the surface sheen is a lyric in which Gary worries about his lack of originality and his waning popular success, key Numan themes for this period, and whatever else Gary Numan does, he will always give us total honesty. The line, my confession, I'll steal anything in sight or sound, my confession, this is the sound of fear and I'll fall down." And at the same time, the lyrics also seem to reject the very fame that Gary is striving to maintain. I don't need it, if you're going to leave then do it soon. Another reading of that, at least that part of the lyric, is that it's about Gary's rocky love life, made more interesting by the vocals being taken over by Tessa Niles. I don't suppose you ever laughed at me, your fascination leaves me cold, I don't suppose you ever loved at all. Is Gary still smarting from the betrayal of Debbie Doran, or is this a confession that he was not the perfect boyfriend himself? Shame about the red bow tie though. Thanks so much for that, Ian, that was really, really interesting. Tiago Frigado said, one of the first Numan tracks I ever heard right after Our Friends Electric, I Am Dust, Down in the Park, Cars and Metal. Absolutely loved the tune and the fact that Gary never stops changing his style. You can notice his talent despite the song being poppy, funky, jazzy, punky or industrial. Agree that the last verse is hard to get, but all the rest, plus the music video, are top 80s juice. Joe O'Sullivan said, always love the album. Okay, not as good as the earlier stuff and too much female vocal, but still great. Tricks is an amazing track with a fantastic intro. Frederick Kielberg said, I love it. I started listening to Numan late and in 1985, and then The Fury was one of the first albums by him I bought. I immediately recognised the samples from my favourite film Blade Runner and that begin the album, and I was hooked. Still love the album, including the backing vocals and saxophones, and Your Fascination is the best song on it. Years later, in 1998, when Gary Numan came to Sweden for the first time, I interviewed Gary for the newspaper where I work. He talked about movies mainly, especially about Blade Runner. It's been really cool. And Chris Talbot said, I was just happy that Numan had dropped the blue Smurf look. On Twitter, Ariel Melton said, I love his snarl when he sings If You're Gonna Leave Then Do It Soon, adore the bad boy energy. Ben Rashka said, you might not believe it, but this is one of my favourites because it was the first full Numan album that I had and listened to it completely. Until then, it had all been the singles for me, but I was about 10. Beefed Wrinkler said, I was 15 when I dug into The Fury. Despite not caring for much for pop music with backing vocals prior, my affinity for the use of backing vocals on Berserker and The Fury was instant, as if I always embraced it, and this track is exemplary. Fantastic interplay between Gary and Tessa/Tracy. Simon Rippin said, I thought Your Fascination was different in its beat and form. Following Berserker, I felt the image was off, maybe a bit safe. The sampling was fun, perhaps he should have used the new thing from London Town image here, more Blade Runner-esque, and it needed a cold warning on my breathing. Adrian Hawes said, cool song, my first UK tour in 1985 and it blew my mind. Album is underrated, not least because of the image, but also because he doesn't seem to like that era. Despite the female singers and lots of sax, there is lots to love about it, I agree. And Ted Matson said, strip away the tuxedo, the background singers, the saxophone and the PPG wave, and there are some great Numan songs underneath, including Your Fascination. Wouldn't it be cool if Aid Fenton and Gary remixed and reworked them now? That would be amazing, wouldn't it? And Adrian Tudor said, Your Fascination isn't really Gary Numan at all for me. Berserker was the end of the classic albums for a long while. The song sounds like it's trying to do too much. Could do without the female vocals and not sure about the production. It just seemed to be taking a step away from what Gary Numan was about. So mixed opinions all round, but I'd say overall positive reaction from you guys about Your Fascination and the Fury era. So, since my last episode, Gary has completed his excellent Replicas and Pleasure Principle 45th anniversary shows. I went to one of the Roundhouse gigs and it was excellent. I loved how he managed to fit in every single song from both albums in a non-linear order. Kept me guessing as to what was going to come next. And it was always good to hear songs you don't normally hear. And thanks to everyone who took a card from my wife at some of his shows. We visited Nottingham and Norwich as well as London. So thanks to anyone who took a card and has since been listening to the show. As ever, please get in touch if you'd love a shout out or a mention. You can do so on Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok, all at Numan Podcast on there. And I'd love to hear your Numanoid stories of how you became a fan, just like John Catherall, who wrote, I've just come across your podcast after being handed a card whilst queuing for a gig at Rock City in Nottingham. Whilst I was on holiday in 1979, I was walking down a street and heard some music coming from what I didn't know was a record shop. The only time in my young life, then only 14, that I was interested in what I could hear musically. It stopped me in my tracks. I went into the shop and asked what was playing. The guy wrote on a sticky note, Our Friends Electric by Gary Numan. I couldn't wait to hear that song again, but after the holiday it became my first ever 7-inch, and my collecting continues to this day. Every day his music is on in my car. Every time he is touring I go to see him. I'm 60 now, and I'll be listening to Gary Numan as long as I live. So thank you, John, and please do send me your stories like that. I'd love to read them out on the show. You can email me newmanpodcast@gmail.com. I'm also uploading all past and current episodes to YouTube if you prefer listening on there, including video versions of my interview specials such as Chris Fielding, Teresa Bazar, which has just gone on there, Chris Payne, John Webb and others. So hope you enjoy those too. And that is it for now. Head over to newmanpodcast.com for more and spread the word to your fellow Newmanoids. But for now, have a good one.
If you want it, every little girl is welcome here. If you want it, every little girl is welcome here.
Electric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast celebrating the tracks by a musical pioneer.